Welcome to the debate. When a cartographer sits down to draw a map of a newly discovered territory, they don't start by painting in the subtle blending of ecosystems.
Right, no.
They don't sketch the intricate overlapping migrations of birds across the valleys. I mean, they start with rigid, uncompromising lines, the borders.
Yeah. Here's the land, here's the sea.
Exactly. You have to draw the strict boundaries first, because without that categorical certainty, you just have chaos. And today we're looking at something that seems incredibly simple, which is beginner English lessons. But we're asking a surprisingly deep question about those borders. We are putting our focus entirely on the A2 level of English, specifically looking at how a foundational grammar text constructs the very concept of human identity.
It's a massive question.
Right? When a textbook teaches you to say, I am a teacher, is it trapping you in a rigid mathematical box? Or is it, handing you the key to fluid social connection?
And I know it sounds kind of wild to assign heavy philosophical weight to a worksheet that just says, he is an actor, she is a banker. But think about what is actually happening in the brain here.
Yeah, exactly.
We are analyzing a foundational source text focused on names, occupations, the singular forms of the verb to be, and, the mechanics of indefinite articles. It seems simple on the surface, but the cognitive implications of how we teach a human being to say I am in a new language, that carries immense weight.
It really does. We are talking about the literal architecture of self-expression here. And just to outline our positions clearly from the jump, I'm going to argue that A2 English fundamentally builds linguistic confidence through strict categorical certainty and rigid identity markers.
Okay.
The foundation of a new language requires absolute boundaries.
And I will argue that the curriculum actually prioritizes fluid relational dynamics, through conversational pivots and grammatical flexibility. I believe the text proves that even at the most foundational level, language subverts rigidity.
Well, let me outline my perspective first, because I think the architecture of the brain demands this rigidity. A2 level English absolutely relies on categorical certainty to build language skills.
How so?
If you look at the text's grammar section, specifically the singular statements using the verb be, the curriculum structures human identity as a strict binary. A person is forced into absolute boxes. He is a teacher. He is not a student. There is no middle ground. And furthermore, the strict application of indefinite articles, being a teacher versus an actor, it enforces a highly rigid, rule-based approach to defining exactly who someone is.
Right.
So at this A2 level, identity is necessarily taught as an uncompromising, absolute construct. It's the architectural scaffolding required before any nuance can exist.
I come at it from a different way. I see the architectural appeal of that view, sure, but the text actually subverts that rigidity almost immediately. It introduces the learner to social fluidity.
Where do you see that?
Well, if you look at the exact same grammar section, particularly the text's treatment of negative contractions, learners are instantly given multiple ways to express the exact same reality. You are not, you're not, you aren't.
Okay, but
That is multiplicity. Additionally, the text's capstone conversation model proves that an occupation isn't a static existential label at all. It's a functional social bridge designed entirely to reach one vital phrase, which is, and you.
I see.
The curriculum isn't building boxes, It's building bridges.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on how these negative statements actually function in the brain of a learner.
Okay, go ahead.
Let's start with those negatives, because this brings us to the core mechanism of how identity is bounded. The curriculum heavily emphasizes negative statements to teach exclusion. The exercises require identifying what someone is not.
Right, he is not a banker.
Exactly. He is not a banker. I am not an athlete. Think about early language learning less like building a bridge and more like a starter pack in a video game.
A video game?
Yeah, you're dropped into a massive, overwhelming world. You don't have the skill points yet to navigate the nuance of the entire map. You're given a simple tool, a binary switch. You must definitively establish what is outside your perimeter before you can safely understand what is inside. It's a categorization that establishes selfhood by rejecting alternative identities.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why.
Okay.
You're looking at the semantic meaning of the negative, the exclusion, but you're ignoring the grammatical delivery mechanism the text provides.
What do you mean?
The text doesn't just teach he is not a banker. It specifically outlines 3 distinct valid pathways to express that exclusion. He is not, he's not, and he isn't.
Right, the contractions.
Yeah. If the goal of the curriculum was strict, rigid video game starter pack categorization, a single structural formula would suffice. It would be mathematically clean, low cognitive load.
Sure.
But by offering 3 distinct ways to say someone is not something, the text teaches the A2 learner a profound underlying truth. Language is flexible. It's not just about exclusion. It's about stylistic choice, tone, and social context.
Wait, let me make sure I'm following your logic here. Are you saying that teaching someone to say he is not a banker in 3 different ways is actually teaching them to modulate their social identity?
Yes, exactly. The mechanism of social modulation is baked right into the grammar. He is not carries a formal emphatic weight.
True.
He isn't is casual, it's conversational. The learner is already being asked to modulate their identity based on their social environment. They are learning that the way they assert an identity is just as important as the identity itself.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because you're assuming a level of intentionality that an A2 learner simply doesn't possess yet.
You think it's too advanced?
I do. The existence of 3 contractions doesn't negate the fact that the underlying reality being expressed is an absolute void. Whether I say he is not, he's not, or he isn't, I am still locking him out of the category of banker. The boundary is still there. You've just painted the gate 3 different colors. The psychological comfort for the A2 learner comes from the certainty of that boundary. They need to know that architect and athlete are mutually exclusive categories in this pedagogical space.
But
It gives them the confidence to speak without drowning in ambiguity.
ambiguity is exactly what those contractions introduce. The boundary you're describing isn't a solid brick wall. It's highly permeable, and the gate swings both ways depending on who you're talking to.
If we're fencing out who we aren't, what exactly are we fencing in? Because this leads us directly to how the text maps human existence. If we examine the vocabulary booster section,
Oh, yeah.
the curriculum presents 10 foundational occupations: teacher, student, architect, actor, athlete, musician, artist, banker, singer, flight attendant. It explicitly asks students to point to pictures of people and label them. He's an architect. She's a flight attendant.
Notice how almost all of those are purely transactional?
Precisely. This anchors the learner's foundational vocabulary to transactional labor. I have to ask, isn't the text inherently reducing human complexity to mere occupational function?
I see where you're going with this.
It forces the learner to adopt a lens of economic utility to ensure grammatical simplicity. You are what you produce. That is the ultimate rigid box.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered what happens right after that vocabulary list? You're looking at the words in isolation as if the goal of the lesson is simply to point at humans like they're, exhibits in an economic museum.
They kind of are in this context.
But look at the conversation activator at the end of the lesson. The entire unit culminates in a dialogue. Person A says, "What do you do?" Person B replies, "I'm an architect. And you?" Person A responds, "I'm a banker."
Right.
The true pedagogical goal of this text isn't the economic label.
Then what is it? Because the literal title of the unit is Names and Occupations.
The subject matter is occupations, yes, but the function is the relational pivot. The phrase "and you" proves that the occupation itself is secondary. The text uses these occupations not as economic cages, but as conversational currency.
Currency?
Yeah, the label of architect or banker is just the token you hand to another person to invite them into an ongoing social negotiation. Think about the cognitive load we mentioned earlier. The curriculum knows that an A2 learner cannot articulate the full depth of their soul in a new language yet. If your brain is struggling just to conjugate the verb to be, you cannot express your deepest hopes and fears.
Fair enough.
So the text gives the learner a simple, universally recognizable token
an occupation to initiate contact. The ultimate goal isn't to declare I am a banker. The goal is to successfully pass the conversational ball back with and you. Identity here isn't an economic endpoint. It's a social springboard.
I'll give you that the token passing is a nice social dynamic, but look at the strict mechanical toll required to even hand over that token.
The grammar?
Yes, the text mandates extreme structural adherence before the social exchange can happen. This brings me to the mechanics of indefinite articles. The text dictates absolute rules. A teacher versus an actor. A banker versus an architect. The sound of the occupation's first letter dictates the grammar.
Which, again, is just a standard phonetic rule of English.
Sure, but think about why the brain craves this algorithm at the A2 level. Early language acquisition is essentially cognitive overload.
Absolutely.
The brain is drowning in new sounds, new structures, new cultural contexts. By creating a strict mathematical rule, if the word starts with a vowel sound, it gets an. If it starts with a consonant sound, it gets a. The curriculum isn't just building a cage. It's giving the brain a necessary anchor so it doesn't wash away in the ambiguity. The learner is forced to submit to rigid auditory rules before claiming an identity. You cannot just be an architect.
Right, you have to use an.
You must correctly process the vowel sound, apply the specific article an, and construct the equation, subject plus verb to be plus indefinite article plus noun. It's highly structured. It trains the brain to process identity through a sieve of uncompromising phonetic logic.
I see the logic in the cognitive anchor, but you see an algorithm where I see the text actually playing with the limits of its own rigid rules.
Playing with the rules? How?
To understand this, we have to look at the exercise that immediately follows that grammar practice. The text introduces real-world, highly complex figures. It brings in Orlando Bloom, Luis Miguel, Zhao Yan-Ser, Marta.
Okay.
These are multifaceted human beings. Orlando Bloom isn't just an actor. He's a father, a producer, a human with a vast internal life. Marta is a legendary football player, an icon. But the text asks the learner to apply these basic binary rules to them. Orlando Bloom, he's an actor, he's not a singer.
Which proves my point exactly. It reduces them. It takes the infinite complexity of Marta and shrinks it down to she's an athlete.
Well,
it proves that the framework demands that identity conform to its limited parameters. It is an act of linguistic compression. You must shrink your identity to fit the available words.
it's not compression, it's translation. And translation inherently requires finding the nearest workable bridge. But more importantly, the text does this knowing the learner already holds the external context of who these people are.
Right.
By asking a learner to apply basic A2 grammar to famous, multifaceted individuals, the text playfully acknowledges the limitations of its own structure. The learner knows Orlando Bloom is more than just an actor. The juxtaposition of strict grammar against real-world celebrity inherently introduces nuance.
You think the text is doing that on purpose?
Definitely. The text is essentially acknowledging to the learner, we have to use these simple boxes for now to practice a and an, but we both know the real world is bigger than this. The friction between the rigid grammar and the reality of the people being described teaches the learner that linguistic labels are approximations, not absolutes.
Let me stop you there because I want to make sure I grasp the mechanics of what you're arguing. Are you suggesting that a beginner English text is embedding a meta-commentary on the limits of language?
I'm suggesting that by grounding strict rules in complex reality, the nuance is unavoidable.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently. I don't think there's any subtextual winking going on here. A2 English is fundamentally about survival in a new linguistic environment.
Survival?
Yes. When you drop a learner into the deep end of a new language, nuance is a luxury they cannot afford. The reason Orlando Bloom is reduced to an actor is precisely because the learner needs the safety of the binary. They need to know that if they misapply the article, if they say, he is a actor, the machinery of the language breaks down. The rigidity of a versus an isn't a playful approximation. It's the load-bearing pillar of mutual intelligibility. If we abandon the categorical certainty of the rule, the learner is left without a compass.
But mutual intelligibility isn't solely derived from perfect grammatical equations. It's derived from a shared desire to be understood. If an A2 learner says he is an actor, communication doesn't actually break down.
Well, technically.
The listener still understands the identity being conveyed. And the text anticipates this by placing such a heavy emphasis on the rhythm and intonation of the conversation model. Step 2 of the conversation activator explicitly tells learners to focus on the rhythm of the exchange.
Right, the pronunciation.
They aren't just reciting data. They are learning the music of social interaction. The rhythm of "I'm an architect and you" carries as much meaning as the indefinite articles do. It's relational fluidity overriding strict mechanical compliance.
You make a fair point about rhythm, but we cannot ignore that the text physically forces the learner to write down affirmative and negative statements about these real people. Luis Miguel, he's a singer, he's not an athlete.
Sure.
The learner must literally write the boundary into existence. The act of writing "he is not" solidifies the categorical exclusion. The text is instilling a habit of mind. To define a thing, you must meticulously catalog its attributes and definitively state its exclusions. This is a highly empirical, almost scientific approach to human identity.
And yet, returning to those contractions, the learner has the freedom to write "he is not," "he's not," or "he isn't." Even in the act of writing the boundary, the learner is granted agency over the shape of the boundary.
Agency over the contraction? Sure.
The text provides the tools for empirical categorization, yes, but it immediately pairs them with the tools for personal expression. The A2 learner isn't a robot executing code. They're a social agent navigating a new landscape, choosing which contraction feels right for the moment. By using simple, universally recognized tokens like banker or student, the text lowers the cognitive load of vocabulary retrieval so the learner can focus on the real work, which is the human connection.
This has been a fascinating exploration of the material, and it really highlights the tension at the heart of learning a new language.
It really does.
To summarize my position in light of our discussion, I maintain that the foundation of language requires the rigid scaffolding of categorical certainty. We see this evidenced deeply in the A2 level text through the strict binaries of the verb to be and the uncompromising phonetic rules of indefinite articles.
When a learner is first drawing the map of their identity in a new language, they rely on absolute boundaries, knowing exactly what they are and exactly what they are not. It strikes me that learning a new language essentially forces you to revert to a childlike binary state of the world. You have to accept the rigid boxes first, and only by mastering those boxes do you earn the right to adult nuance.
That's a fascinating way to look at it. And my conclusion remains that while those boxes exist, this foundational language is fundamentally built on social interaction and multiplicity.
Right.
The immediate introduction of negative contractions, the friction of using complex real-world figures, and above all, the conversational pivot of "and you," prove that identity at the A2 level is not a static endpoint. It's a fluid relational dynamic. The language is taught not as an absolute definition of self, but as a tool for social negotiation.
I think we can certainly acknowledge a profound point of convergence here. Whether we view these A2 frameworks as rigid algorithms providing a cognitive anchor, or fluid social springboards lowering the barrier to human connection, we both agree that basic grammar texts are doing tremendous philosophical work.
Absolutely.
They are dictating the initial terms through which learners must articulate their very existence in a new language.
The text is quietly handing the learner a new lens through which to view human interaction. And there's just so much more to explore in this material regarding how we translate our identities across linguistic borders. It really invites us to ask whether learning a new language simply gives us new words for our old selves, or if it fundamentally alters our perception of who we are.
It brings us back to that cartographer drawing the map for the very first time. When you finally lay down those borders and declare where the mountain ends and the valley begins, you have to wonder, did you simply document the territory, or did drawing the lines actually change the shape of the world you live in? Thank you for